Now, in previous review series, one criticism that I have received that I understand but I don't agree with is that you're supposed to go back and review the show and just review the show, and the stuff that happens afterwards or as a result or what it led up to shouldn't really factor in that much. Well, in theory, that sounds nice, but that's not the case. Keep in mind, I'm doing a retro review series. So I have the ability to look through the scope of history. And to be fair, when you go back and watch a lot of these older shows, sometimes that historical perspective can make a show better than what it actually was at the time. Sometimes on the flip side, it can make a show worse than what it might have seemed at the time, like we know my thoughts on WrestleMania 17, what have you. But I look back at a show like Survivor Series 1988, and in terms of matches, like thrilling, captivating action, um, this is not the show for you. If you're from a younger generation of wrestling fan, again, this is an entirely different era. It's not necessarily going to resonate with you. It's not necessarily going to work for you. And that's just the way it is sometimes. You might try to have an appreciation or not for the things that have come before. But for a fan like me that grew up during this era, that experienced this era firsthand and still has the ability 25, 26 years later to go back and relive those moments and memories, I have an appreciation for that's renewed. And in some ways, going back and being able to look at it, it gives me a fresher perspective and reminds me of some of the good things that the WWF used to be about and used to do. Like I talked about in the 87 review, talking about how during that Hogan expansion era, the top of the card was outstanding. The middle of the card, child, please, just as outstanding, perhaps even more so. And then let's not even get to the tag team division, also outstanding. And those elements are still in play here in 1988. But there are other things that when you go back and watch a show like this, it gives you a greater appreciation for how good things used to be. And at the same point in time, it really pisses you off because you say, that was in theory a PG era back then. And look at all these tremendous, wonderful things that they did. Why can't we get anything close to resembling that in today's product? And I look at things like the way the WWF used to plan things out. And when you go back and watch these shows, you get that clear vision and understanding of they had this shit planned out months, if not a year, 18 months in advance. The mega powers. You talk about these guys, really started to align with each other towards the end of 1987. And by the time you were getting to the middle and end of 1989, they were still doing business, still main eventing the big four pay-per-views. That's 2 years worth of story revolving around two guys. You could barely do that for 3 months now. The WWF was able to do that for 2 years. And quality stuff. When you talk about great rivalries in the history of professional wrestling and in the WWF/WWE, even I'm criminally negligent on this. One rivalry that doesn't get nearly the love that it deserves is Hogan and Savage. But there was more. Just the quality of talent and stars on the roster at this time, in the tag team division, in the mid card, in the close to main event, the actual main event scene. I mean, you had so many big stars. Andre, Rick Rude, Mr. Perfect, Harley Race was still around at this time. Jake the Snake Roberts, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Like I said, all the guys in the tag team division. A young up-and-comer like the Ultimate Warrior. I mean, just absolutely loaded talent rosters. The benefit of the territory system and then being able to swoop in and buy all that talent. You get an incredibly deep and talented roster. And that allows you to do a lot of good things. You talk about X's and O's just like in sports, all the freak you want. But man, when you got them Jimmies and Joes, it can compensate for so much. And when you put the right X's and O's with the right Jimmies and Joes, magic can happen. When I go back and I watch a show like Survivor Series 1988, these are some of the things that I look at. These are some of the things that make these shows enjoyable for me to go back and watch. Because frankly, this is an example here of a show. I love this old Survivor Series gimmick, the way it used to be. But again, we're talking about a 4-match card. You got a 20-minute tag match, a 40-plus minute tag match with 10 tag teams involved, a 30-minute tag match, another 30-minute tag match. Too few matches, and the matches that happened were largely too long. And in these type of matches, you didn't necessarily get a lot of great in-ring action. There wasn't a lot of actual story told in these matches. Now, what you would get is a tremendous interweaving of characters. You'd get the crazy off-the-wall interviews that would come hyping these matches with all these different personalities on one side of the fence or other, talking about this and that. These guys would touch, but then it would spill over to these guys, and these guys would intervene. It was just tremendous. And then you could see how different things were happening along the way, like in the case of Hogan and Savage. You're not all the way there yet, but you're really setting the table for what's going to be the main event of WrestleMania 5. But at the same point in time, understanding that you can't just rely upon two guys at the top, WWE. Remember when you used to have that philosophy? Yes, you used to rely on one guy at the top. Different era, drew a hell of a lot more money than the fucking Fruity Pebble dipshit you got pounded in that fucking spot now, who you say artificially draws big time money when in fact he does not. But they didn't just rely upon that top guy, even though he was the breadwinner, because they did so many other things to really make it a team effort. And even in that case, they still emphasized building up new top guys, building up new stars. And you look at the first of the 4 tag matches on this card. That match was all about one thing. That was about getting the Ultimate Warrior over. Period. When you look at that opening tag match, it's not going to be some type of visual masterpiece, because in part at that time it involved the Ultimate Warrior. Let's call it how we see it. At that time, Warrior wasn't very good. He just wasn't. He had some of those it factors, and no, it wasn't just being a steroided freak. And I hate when people say that. He had an incredible charisma about him, an incredible ability to connect with the audience. He was a phenomenal comic book character come to life. To sit there and say that type of stuff about the Ultimate Warrior really demeans the man and his legacy and his impact, frankly. And a lot of that, frankly, wrestling fans have learned because they have been programmed by some of the selfish idiots, the Ric Flairs of the world, what have you, that are jealous because a guy like the Ultimate Warrior, Jim Hellwig, could draw the type of money that he did, doing what the fuck he did. And a lot of these other guys, some of these so-called legends of all time, couldn't dream of doing that on their best fucking day. And if you think it was strictly, and I mean strictly because of Vince McMahon and the Titan Tower machine, you are sadly mistaken. Because just because you get the Titan Tower machine behind you, that does not mean you're going to become a big-time fucking megastar. And I look at somebody like a Randy Orton today. He's a star. He's had the Titan Tower machine behind him for freaking years. But he most certainly isn't a megastar. He most certainly isn't a household name. He most certainly isn't a crossover mainstream appeal type of guy. And if you say so, you really love raging ring boners popping out of your 3D TV right in your eye. But again, this first match is all about one thing. Sure, you have other people involved in all of that, but this is about the Ultimate Warrior and getting the Ultimate Warrior over and getting him ready. You knew someday that this guy could be a monster. You knew someday that this guy could be a world champion for you. So you got to go through the steps and progress this guy up the card, slowly but surely, getting him more and more over as time goes along. That's what makes some of these older shows, like I said, so much fun to go back and watch. You could see those seeds being planted. And you would see this, too, in the early portions of the Attitude Era, and even in before that, 96 and 97, where you had guys like Austin, Rock, Triple H, Mick Foley. They're starting to progress up the card slowly but surely, picking up momentum. And it's a beautiful thing to see when you can go back and look, and even as it was happening, and you see these guys start to get hot, you start to see them gaining a lot of momentum, and you continue to build upon that and build upon that. And by the time you get, where you need to go, these guys become big-time stars. You see that type of stuff today with somebody maybe like a Dean Ambrose. Now, of course, the WWE will do its best to try and screw the pooch with them eventually, but those are the type of guys that could become big stars in due time. And somebody like the Ultimate Warrior, again, the WWF at the time knew what the hell they were doing. This was an Ultimate Warrior showcase piece, and in that case, it completely delivered like it needed to. I've always thought that the the 10-team tag was one big rib. When you have the Conquistadors going all the way to the final two teams to have them lose to the Powers of Pain, holy shit. But again, a lot of great tag teams involved with this. It was over 40 minutes. It was a really long match. Probably too long. Probably too many teams. But if you go back and watch it, you just seen the Conquistadors lasting that long was fucking hilarious. Also, the way they did the freaking double switch, Bret Hart, because Bret Hart believes his own bullshit all the time, always sits there and says him and Austin did the first ever double turn. I say, well, for your opinion, I'll grade you a 4 out of 10 because you were completely off fucking base. This is one example here of a double turn. Demolition's heel. Powers of Pain face. By the time this match is over, Fuji smacks Axe with the freaking cane. They attack him. Bam! Demolition's baby faces. Now WWF's got their Road Warriors version of a tag team as baby faces. Powers of Pain bring Fuji over to their corner. Bam! They're freaking heels. That was it. And just like that, both teams had flipped allegiances. You didn't need some long, drawn-out bullshit or anything like that. A little confrontation, a smack of the cane, beating the ass, and fucking they take the manager, and that's it. So genius and so simple all at the same time. Good shit to see. Man, you go back and watch some of these things, though, and you see the Rockers. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. Man, that's a long time ago. But then you got, Andre's team. He's got Rick Rude and Mr. Perfect and Harley Race, and then one dead French Canadian that isn't one of those other four named Andre, Rick Rude, Mr. Perfect, or Harley Race. And you got on the other team, Jake the Snake Roberts, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Tito Santana, and then Ken Patera must have busted out of the joint. And then fucking Scott Casey. I forgot he was on this pay-per-view. Oh, God, Christ. But again, this match here, not incredible. Not great from a wrestling standpoint, but you look at the stars involved and you look at how some of these guys were being introduced and what was going to be done with them down the road in the next year or two to come. And you've got Rick Rude and Jake the Snake and Andre the Giant and Mr. Perfect and some really good shit here. In fact, that's part of the thrill of going back and watching some of these old shows is just to see all these talents and all these stars. Because, man, it's amazing. They don't have to do much, but they've got my full fucking attention. And then, of course, the main event. You've got the Mega Powers versus the Twin Towers. And, what more can I really say? The Mega Powers, one of my favorite tag teams of all time, if you will. One of my favorite storylines of all time, if you will. One of my favorite rivalries of all time that, sadly, I don't talk about nearly enough. Again, this was a tremendous time in the WWF because you could go back and watch the kind of episodic way these things were done, and the fact that there were storyline arcs and there were ebbs and flows and it was natural and organic. Nothing was too forced. Nothing was rushed. They took their time. They planned it out, and it came across c'est magnifique. But you think about this, though. You look at Survivor Series 88. Hogan and Savage as the Mega Powers. They're main eventing. SummerSlam 88. They're main eventing against DiBiase and Andre. WrestleMania 5. Hogan and Savage main eventing that show. Different time, different era. But it also reminds you sometimes of why you missed that era so much. Because these stories and these characters could grab you and they could captivate you and they could, really get you enthralled in what was going on. And these stories could carry on for long, extended periods of time, and you weren't overexposed to them. You didn't get worn out by them. You actually wanted more of them. So again, Survivor Series 1988. From a pure in-ring standpoint, again, just like with 87, it's definitely one you could probably largely skip. If you want some good historical perspective and you want to see how good the WWF used to be able to do things compared to how poorly the WWE does so many things now, this is a show that you want to go back and watch. If you're somebody from my age demographic and you miss some of the good old days of WWF and professional wrestling as a whole, these are the types of shows that you need to go back and watch. No question about it.